I say the same thing every time I come and talk to AIJAC, which is that I come and talk to a similar pro-Israel group in Washington, and I know 50% of the people, and then I come to talk to a group in Melbourne, and I know 80% of the people, which is really, oops. And apparently that do not disturb doesn't really work. Now I'm back. In any case, it really is a pleasure. And my background is that I was born here, so that's a very serious background, actually. There's so much for me to talk about, but you're also a very knowledgeable crowd. You've got your own questions, and so I'll try to keep my remarks a little bit short. I'm also going to jump around a little bit, hopefully not insanely, but I want to touch on different things, and then we can go more in depth as you ask questions. So why don't we start with Washington, since that's where I live and have the pleasure of doing business. I think for many of us, after the Obama administration, after the JCPOA, the so-called Iran nuclear deal, and the presence of what we nastily in Washington call so many Obama retreads, former officials of the Obama administration in the Biden administration, we expected that the reaction to the attacks of October 7th would have been very different. The Biden administration has been, for the last 2.5 years, been trying very, very hard to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. As a result, over the last few years, since the end of the Trump administration, there have been almost no sanctions imposed on Iran. Now, how does that work? Well, Iran makes most of its money from the sale of oil. We sanctioned the sale of oil. Starting in February of 2021, we stopped sanctioning mostly Chinese buyers. This has meant a windfall to the government of Iran of between 87 and 95 billion US dollars. Those are real dollars, believe me. And so when people talk to me about, the $6 billion that's in Qatar, I get less excited because I'm much more excited about something that's close to $100 billion that has been directly financing terrorism. In addition, they have over the last 2 years been engaged in secret talks with the Iranians that they have not disclosed to most of the US government, including the US Congress, and made a deal with them, which is what that $6 billion was for. To first release the hostages, the American hostages that Iran took, but second to lay low a little bit up until the 2024 election. What does that mean? Slow down the stockpiling of highly enriched uranium, which has obviously been a source of great agony to those of us who are worried about it. So this is sort of the administration that we expected to look at what happened on October the 7th and obviously be shocked as human beings, but politically be very eager to sort of, now let's not, and we heard them, right? Well, we don't know whether Iran was involved in this, and everybody, but no, I tweeted, or whatever, X sounds wrong, but I tweeted this out yesterday or the day before, and I really believe it. The president has been great, really. Now, I've known Joe Biden since 1992 when I went to work for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's what we call an old school Democrat in America, right? Joe Lieberman, Howard Berman. I'm not just picking Jews. Joe Biden, obviously not Jewish, but the Democratic Party, the pro-Israel party, much more pro-Israel than the Republican Party, which is no longer the case. Now, I don't want to talk about American politics too much, but I believe, and this is my analysis, so feel free to challenge me on it. I believe that our policy towards Israel is 100% the president. Now, I don't think he's always as there as one might want. I think having a president that age is not optimal, but he's been great, and I think he has stood between the hundreds of Foreign Service officers, that's our civil service, right, and others at the Department of State, people within his own White House, including his own national security advisor, who don't support this policy. right? And it would have called for ceasefire now a long time ago. He has been the stalwart who has refused to ask the Israelis for a ceasefire. He is the one, he is the reason that 3 days ago we vetoed that outrageous demand in the United Nations Security Council from our beloved Secretary General Antonio Guterres to call for a ceasefire against his friends that have been supported so ardently by the United Nations in Hamas. So I think it's important to start there. Now, I will tell you, the Democratic Party is not behind Joe Biden on this. That means, and he has lost more than 10 points in the polls because of this. Okay. Now, there's a big conversation to be had about, particularly about Gen Z, right? Younger people, university students, university culture, and anti-Semitism, because this is the root of his loss. Okay, it's not Arabs. It's people who support. It's people who support this idea that Israel is a bunch of colonialists who have oppressed the Palestinian people unjustly. Those are where the numbers are coming from. And just a tiny footnote in case you want to ask about it. One of the reasons why they've done so, there are seats up here, and I promise I won't ask you questions about why you came late. But one of the reasons for this upswing in anti-Semitism, in anti-Semitic attitudes, in these tropes about the oppressed and the oppressors, about colonizers and the colonized, comes from TikTok, okay? Chinese Communist Party owned TikTok. Anyone who'd like to see, I've got a chart showing how when the Chinese started pressing this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel line, how the numbers of support for Biden among young people went down. Okay? You can see it. It's very graphic. And by the way, this decision by the Chinese, not our topic today, but hugely, hugely important. First of all, for Australia, right? You're closer, you're smaller. But second of all, for us, the anti-Semitism that is on TikTok and on Douyin, which is Chinese TikTok, right? Because of course they don't have TikTok, is incredible. On the Chinese map platforms, Google Maps, Waze, those equivalents, Israel no longer exists, okay? People with millions of followers are spouting anti-Semitic tripe. Somebody, one of my colleagues, Jonah Goldberg, who you should absolutely get out here at some point, who's much more famous than I am and fantastic, just fantastic, noted that really, if you have to ask yourself, who are the biggest colonizers in the world? It's kind of the Chinese. And then the Russians, who have also been virulently supporting this anti-Semitism throughout Europe. And they've actually arrested and seen a number of operations. Anyway, I got into that. Okay, so for me, the question for us is that we have a big election next year. You probably haven't heard about it and aren't thinking about it at all. But 2024 is obviously a big election year. It's obviously a very controversial election year. Two people who 70% of Americans don't want to run again, and yet shockingly keep voting for in primaries. We could be here all day just talking about about all of these things. But the President of the United States wants to get reelected. Yes, of course, he's been great on Israel. He's been really stalwart. He has been a wall of iron, really. But he also wants to get reelected. He's got to get its numbers back. And at a certain point, there's going to be a fight between the principles that he holds dear and the political advisors who he holds dearer, right? Because he wants to win. Okay. And he'll make all sorts of excuses for himself. Winning is more important in the long term than it is to do this and this. This is why they started to ratchet up pressure on the Israelis. It remains quiet, but it's there, right? They've got the Israelis' feet, and they're just sort of to the fire. They want them to go quickly. They want a lot of this to be, they want a lot of operations to spare civilian lives, which we understand and also want, but that means the sacrifice of a lot of Israeli lives as well. The Israelis don't publicize their numbers, but we're well up over 400 deaths at this point, okay? Now, we're also well up over probably 15,000 Palestinian deaths, of which we have no idea how many are Hamas and not. Because it's the strangest place in the world, but there are very few young men who live in Gaza. I don't know if you knew that. And so the numbers that we get from the United Nations, from the Hamas-controlled Palestinian Ministry of Health, which are one and the same, actually don't break out young men, but minimize very aggressively those numbers. Anyway, the political pressures are going to start building. I think we've got a sort of a respite, a moment, but coming into January, what's going to happen is that you're going to start seeing pressure ratchet up from Washington. The Arabs obviously feel the same way, not because they don't want Hamas to lose. They very much want Hamas to lose. They very much want Hamas to get a black eye and Iran to get a black eye. But they've got this balance that they have to strike after telling their people for the last 70 years that, you know, the Palestinians are the most important things in the world. It's hard to say, but you know, now it's okay that they all die. So we've got this real challenge. And what's going to happen with the Israelis? You watch the news, you know day to day what's happening, you know where they are. They've taken most of the critical parts of northern Gaza. They've taken out about 500 of the 800 tunnels that they found in northern Gaza. They've moved down towards Khan Yunis. This is obviously going to be much more difficult, much more dangerous. And the argument that they're making right now strategically is that Hamas knows that they've lost. I don't know that that's true. It's always hard to sort out the propaganda and the party line from what's happening. But we are certainly seeing more surrender of Hamas people. We're seeing more people come out in the streets and saying, you know, those old ladies with the headscarves screaming, I don't care, you can come and kill me, you take all the food from me and take it underground, I hate you. And we've all seen those absolutely great videos. But support for Hamas is still very strong. In Gaza and also in the West Bank. Here's the problem, okay? Pardon me, I feel like I have sushi in my teeth. Yes, it's a characteristic of all of these kinds of meetings, and no one will tell me. Coming back to this, the question for everybody, I think, is what's going to happen, right? Okay, so Israel has laid out its goal. It is going to destroy Hamas militarily and administratively. Even though the Qataris say every word that comes out of their mouth is a lie, so I don't believe it, they say the Israelis have pledged to them not to come hunt down the Hamas leadership that's worth billions of dollars that lives in Doha. The Israelis have said that's not how it's going to be. I suspect it's going to look a little bit like the retribution after the Olympics. You know, we'll take our time. We'll wait for you, you know. Don't feel comfortable, rather than they're going to take them out in one fell swoop. Okay, they kill them. The estimate is there are 40,000 Hamas fighters. That's a lot of people to kill, right? Those are mostly men. If we reckon that they've probably killed 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 Hamas fighters, I think that's a reasonable ballpark, and nobody really knows. But if they've killed that many, that leaves a lot, okay? That's number one. They're not going to be able to kill them all. They're going to kill the top people, the top brigade commanders, the top everybody around. But then they're going to have to pull out. They don't want to occupy Gaza again. And having spent time in Gaza, I can say, yes, I know why. And we also know why the Egyptians didn't want to keep Gaza, because it's Gaza. But they have a problem. And the Israelis have not been sending out a lot of hasbara. They've been doing a lot of propaganda, a lot of outreach, a lot of information sharing. What they have done is rely on public statements, social media, the IDF spokesman, who's really great. But a couple of weeks ago, they started sending kind of big groups out to various countries. And so I met with a big group of them in Washington. Senior Air Force General, who was very interesting, and, you know, assorted colonels, majors, young people, defense attachés. They weren't very good. The conversation was off the record, so I won't tell you what they said. But everybody wanted to know, not, you know, what are you doing now? How are you winning now? What do they look like? What happened on October 7th? Because we know, right? They wanted to know, okay, what are you going to do afterwards? And they can tell you what they're not going to do. We're not going to occupy Gaza, okay? The United Nations isn't going to occupy Gaza. There's not going to be a United Nations peacekeeping force. The Palestinian Authority is currently constituted, is not going to be governing over Gaza. I didn't volunteer. But it's a question, right? Who? What? And they don't have an answer for it. You can't have an answer. You can't not have an answer. And I know they're thinking about it, but there is no easy answer, right? There's no plug and play, to put it in sort of more modern parlance. There's nobody we can grab. And the Israelis have this little important asterisk, right? It can't be this, it can't be that, it can't be this, it can't be that. Oh, and we need total freedom and latitude of movement to come in and out as we see fit to deal with remaining threats. Also, we're going to need to have, if everybody remembers from southern Lebanon, what they called the Ritzuat HaBitachon, the security belt. We're going to need to have a security belt, okay? The United States is going to oppose that. I'm telling you that right now, okay? Because that's territorial, and it's going to be a problem. So all of this is a recipe for disaster, okay? My former boss used to say to me, always, you can't beat something with nothing, right? And this is where they're like, and of course, the hilarious thing, and I don't feel uncomfortable repeating this about this large Israeli group is, right, we're pressing the general about this, and everybody, all the officers are sitting next to him, flanking him, and they're like, right? And he's like, I don't know. And they're nodding, you need to know, which was kind of funny and very classically Israeli. This is, again, a big, big problem. This is what next year looks like. Okay. Now, let's talk about two other things quickly, and I don't have my...
plenty of time.
Okay. Let's talk about two other things quickly. Let's talk about Iran. Okay. Now, I'm not going to tell you Iran is the state sponsor of terrorism, and they're very bad and nasty and evil and blah, 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 blah. You know that. Number one, the Iranians helped plan this. Okay. I can tell you what I believe is solid proof. I actually wrote it in an article before October 7th. Unfortunately, we didn't publish it till October 9th. Right, every journalist can empathize with me. My brilliance destroyed by an editor. But, right, I know it. It's like every journalist, it's so true. But to be fair, it wasn't the editor's fault. I love her. But it was just a decision we made because we didn't know it was coming right then. But there's no doubt the Iranians have had plans sitting up on the website of the Supreme Leader, an interview with General Salami, who is the head of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, laying out in detail the kind of conflict that they expected would be the beginning of the end for the Israelis. Okay, that's number one. It's this. Okay, Memory. I'm sure you all know Memory did a brilliant job translating it. If it's of interest to you, and I can send you the article if you're interested in it. Number two. Okay. Hamas would not have been able to do this without the Iranians. Okay, they needed extra ammunition. The Israelis need us. Yeah, right. They're going through ammunition at a rate that is X times the amount that, for example, the Ukrainians are. So they need more ammunition. So did Hamas. They needed more food. They needed more security. They needed more water. They needed more money. And there's no one who's giving that to Hamas except Iran. Right? Iran has been coordinating what they call war rooms between Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We don't talk about them very often, but they're worse in some ways than Hamas. They are also in Gaza, and they are also in the Israelis' crosshairs, but a smaller group. Here's the question. Okay. You destroy the top echelons and the middle management of Hamas, right? You kill Yahya Sinwar, you kill all of the senior people. Iran is still there. They are Iran's babies. They are Iran's children. Why is there not going to be a Hamas 2.0, a Hamas 3.0? And this is a conversation none of us want to have. Right? I wrote this a couple of weeks ago. No one wants to talk about, regime change. Remember, Iraq wasn't that terrible. Not if you go to Iraq, it isn't. As long as Iran exists, Hamas will return. As long as Iran exists, Hezbollah will be stronger. The Israelis kicked the crap, forgive me, out of them in 2006. They are stronger now. They are better now. Their reach is further now. One of the things that you can see if you look at a map, and I wish I had a nice map, but you all know what Israel looks like, right? So we've got Israel here, we've got Gaza here, and we've got Lebanon here and Syria here. The border, the so-called blue line between Israel and Lebanon, there are Hezbollah units, proper military units, okay? 6,000 strong force that is like that is the equivalent of the Nukhba force, which is the part of Hamas that conducted October 7th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way along the border. There isn't a crack there, okay? Now, Hezbollah, right, is Iran. Yes, it's Lebanon as well, and that's a different conversation, but it's Iran. So you go out of the frying pan and into the fire. There has to be an effort to deal with Iran. What is it going to be? How is it going to work? Who is the first leader who is going to say this? Because otherwise, at the end of the day, we have an alliance, an axis of, dare I say, evil, right? We've got the Houthis in Yemen who are attacking us directly, right? We've got the Hashd al-Shaabi, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, who are wholly owned subsidiaries of Iran. We've got Hezbollah in Lebanon. We've got other forces, including the Assad regime, but other forces also inside Syria. We've got Hamas, we've got Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and increasingly we've got groups that are in Fatah's area of operation under the Palestinian Authority, right? Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, equivalents that are operating out of the West Bank. They are all backed by, supported by, armed by, trained by, financed by Iran. It's not a tolerable situation. And increasingly, they're being backed without hesitation. I think to the surprise of many of us who thought that these two countries would continue to sort of straddle the fence by Russia and by China. Okay? Accidents happen. We're not prepared. We're not ready. We can't deal with a problem in the Middle East. We, America, not you, can't deal with a problem in the Middle East and in the Pacific at the same time. We can't. Okay? If China chose to take Taiwan tomorrow, and they won't because of the elections in January, thank God. No thanks to the Albanese government. But that's a different complaint. But we're not strong enough. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough ships. We don't have enough aircraft carriers. We don't have enough ammunition. Every war game that we fight, every one, we run out of ammunition fighting China in a week. Okay? So you think, well, of course it's great for Israel because, you know, America has their back. Well, not quite. Last thing, let's just very quickly talk about anti-Semitism, and let's talk about it in this context. I know everybody in this room, and everybody I know and everybody I care about and respect felt exactly the same way, which is, oh my bloody God, I didn't realize so many people hated me. I thought you were gone, you know? I thought you were crazy. I thought you were the fringes, you know? Ilhan Omar and Marjorie Taylor Greene in our political, David Duke. I thought that's who it was. And it turns out, no, it's the president of Harvard. And the president of UPenn, the former president of UPenn, right, and the president of MIT. But behind those Ivy Leagues, those elite schools, are all of the smaller schools and the smaller schools. And this anti-Semitism is not a glitch in the program. It is a feature of the program, okay? They do hate Jews. It's not about Zionists. Okay? It's not about Bibi Netanyahu. It's not about this conflict. Actually, this just ripped off the cover and woke us up. Okay? And I've been really extraordinarily proud of Jewish communities here, and I follow this very closely. That lovely demo in Sydney, Gas the Jews. Yes, wow. And I have seen the Jewish community in America, and it has been stalwart. Jews don't like fighting about anti-Semitism. They don't like confronting people. They don't like calling people nasty words, right? That's not the game. You know, we're quiet, and we do well, and we prosper, and we educate ourselves, And we don't go out looking for trouble, because that's not the character of the Jewish community for the most part. And that is overdone, finished, right? Absolutely. I wouldn't have called somebody an anti-Semite who said some of the things before October 7th that they say now. And now I will out loud in public, and that's what we need to do, right? No mercy, call them out, and then fix our damned immigration systems, fix our universities, fix foreign influence. Yes, and I don't mean to sound like a xenophobe. I'm not, okay? I'm absolutely not. I'm pro-immigration, right? As I say in America always, I am an immigrant. I mean, from Australia, but you know. But fix these things. If you want to have immigrants from countries that don't share our values, then you need to do something about the fact that they don't share your values. If you have a Supreme Court that wants to let out ISIS supporters from prison early, Australia, then you need to do something about the government that lets them do it and change it. And this is really where we have been fighting about education, about calling people out, about standing up, about protecting people who want to stand up for Jewish rights. My children on college campuses see this. My children in places of work see this. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion people who believe that being a discriminator against Jews isn't the same as discriminating against indigenous people or trans people or black people or brown people or God knows what people. We are somehow special. Okay, I will give you my last little thing, and I hope I don't screw it up. One of my daughters, my youngest, who's in university, is in a class on anti-Semitism. She's writing her final paper on Der Stürmer and the cartooning done in this Julius Streicher, the most anti-Semitic newspaper of the Third Reich, and before. It started in 1923. And so I was looking up to see what the other newspapers were like. And there was, of course, the much less popular mouthpiece of Joseph Goebbels, Der Angriff, which was started by the Nazi propaganda ministry to serve him and his interests. What was their motto? We stand with the oppressed against the oppressors. That told me everything I needed to know. Now it's your turn.
Can I ask take moderator's privilege and ask one quick question myself?
Of course.
As long as you're here, and you've made a couple comments about the Australian situation. Mm-hmm. If you had Australia has limited power, limited role, but if you had some advice to what Australia could be doing to make this difficult situation better, both on the Middle East situation and the anti-Semitism front, do you have a few words you could offer us?
Sure. I have many opinions about everything, as you've probably all noticed. And I'm no expert on Australian politics, but I do vote in Australian elections and referenda. So one of the things that I've been proud of, not on every issue, and we have problems about what we call our appropriations process, about whether we are doing money and what are we doing money for, what are we spending money on. But at the March for Israel in Washington, which I went to, I was very proud to see. The Speaker of the House, the former Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, Republicans and Democrats standing up together. It really sent a strong message, and it was the kind of adulthood we don't see very much. When I see that your Prime Minister and your opposition leader are not really standing together, and that your Prime Minister has to be embarrassed into coming to Melbourne and standing with Jewish communities that were assaulted, I think that's a shame. And you can disagree about what to do about Israel, and obviously there is a disagreement. I know who I like better, obviously, but I liked them better before October 7th. But I think that kind of pressure, the fact that that which is politically free, solidarity with your citizens who are under assault, isn't being done, is something that the government should be shamed on. Okay, you don't have to. You want to talk about bringing in more Palestinians? I don't know what's wrong with you, but knock yourself out. You want to talk about, you want to keep Penny Wong here because God knows what would happen if Penny Wong went to Israel. All right. But there are cheap and easy things you can do that show that you have compassion for one of the most important community, enormous percentage of which are the descendants of or are still Holocaust survivors. You know, get off your bloody ass. Don't spend all of your time on foreign trips and come to Caulfield, come to St Kilda, and don't do it begrudgingly. That's free. So that's the kind of advice I would give the government. On China, we'd have to be here for much longer. Anyway, I don't know whether that's useful, but you can hear my biases, obviously.
Okay, I got a lot of Miriam, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks very much, Daniel. For the first time ever on news this morning, they had an interview with a very angry Palestinian from Gaza who said, this is all Sinwar's, is that his name?
Yeah, Sinwar.
Fault. You know, they should surrender, this is his killing his own people. My question is there any chance that the population of Gaza will have had enough of the Hamas leadership?
You know, look, there are a few problems there. The first is it's very dangerous to be that person, okay? They take that footage, they go find you, and they kill you, if you're lucky. Otherwise, they kill you and your family. I don't know if you saw the not very widely publicized footage when people were trying to get out of the hospital, and they were shooting them. Right, they were shooting them. Now the Israelis do not go out and shoot indiscriminately at crowds of people going, you know, they shoot plenty of Palestinians. But this is not what the pattern is of the Israelis. People, the pictures are there of them of them outside Al-Shifa, sprawled out dead on the street. If that's your choice, you're not going to do that. I think we forget that Hamas ran. Remember what Iraq was called under Saddam Hussein, a very good book as well by the same name called Republic of Fear. You know, right? And also people are indoctrinated, and that's the other thing. You know, but there's an even more important point, and this is the thing that I brought up in the talk, which is, oh, okay, I'm going to be against Hamas. Who am I for? Because Fatah, right, which is the heart of the Palestinian Authority, has a. And again, I didn't talk to you about Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. We all use the same phrase. I'm sure it must be in his Wikipedia by now. In the 18th year of his 4-year term. Right. I think it's actually 19 now. But that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, why did Hamas come to popularity? Because everybody thought to themselves, I really want a bunch of Islamist fanatics who can just earn a lot of money and oppress me? No, because Fatah was their other choice, and Fatah is so corrupt. Now it turns out Fatah is less corrupt than Hamas. But still, you know, I wrote a piece about this. Look, the right solution is to give the Palestinians options. We, not we, but we, the royal government, we don't care about the Palestinians at all. Okay. Otherwise, we would, over the last 20 years, have said, what's happened to your institutions? Why was your economy better under Israeli occupation than it is now? Right? Why are your economic attainments collapsing? Why are people leaving? Why do you have a dictator who is crushing serially any opposition that arises? We don't need people. Right? We don't need Yahya Sinwar, we don't need Mahmoud Abbas, we didn't need Yasser Arafat. Okay? We need institutions that last beyond the politics of today. And that's what the Palestinians have never gotten, despite the fact that, and this number is no longer correct, but for many, many years, they were the single per capita largest recipients of aid in the world. Where has it gone? Yeah, we have a guess, right? So this is what is needed. This is what the answer is. And if that had been the investment that was made, first of all, Hamas wouldn't be there. The Iranians wouldn't have gotten a foothold. But third of all, the Israelis, should that have happened, wouldn't have had to ask themselves, who can be in charge? Because the Palestinian Authority should be in charge. Because this is bloody well meant to be Palestine, right? And so that is the problem. They're not going to turn away from Hamas unless they have something else. And I don't know what that is. And right now, Hamas has ensured that there is nothing else. And the Iranians will work to ensure that that remains the case. You pick people because you know your audience.
Don't know everybody, but Robbie?
Thanks. Thanks for your talk. You mentioned that Biden's lost 10 points in the polls, and I think similar things happening to Albanese in Australia as well. I'm wondering whether there's any proportion of that that might be attributed to, although the Australian and American population may not have any particular love for Israel, but they're looking out and they're seeing 100,000 angry people marching in the street with hate in their, frothing from their mouths, and they look at that and what might be the causes of that and attributing that to the leaders, and that might be driving some of the loss of support.
No, in Australia it was the Voice that lost Albanese his support. And in America, no, in America, I think we know what it is. You can dive down into the polls and the questions that get asked. I mean, and you can look at the state of Michigan, which is very heavily dominated by Arab and Muslim voters. And you can look at the articles written by a colleague of mine who I've become less of an admirer of over the last few years, who is at the Brookings Institution, Shadi Hamid. Shadi has a column in the Washington Post now, which is full other side, insane. Shadi says, no, Muslims are not going to vote for you because of your support for Israel. Okay. Now, the people who are outraged, they were never going to vote for them in the first place, right? That's not shifting. But it's a big problem. It's a big problem. And the administration called out the 3 university professors after that absolutely appalling testimony. It needs context. I mean, right. Did anybody see the very hilarious satire, the cover made called Mein Context, as opposed to Mein Kampf? Yeah, she deserved that too. But it's not, it's not outrage at that, because the outrage at that has already been there, right? It's just that some people didn't realize how terrible it was. But I don't think that they're losing numbers because people are upset about the nature and quality of the demonstrations, because they're not.
Danielle, all roads lead to Tehran.
Yes.
What can we do about that? What can America do about it? What can Israel do about it? I mean, that's the crux of the whole problem, isn't it?
Well, it is, yes. It is. And it's the kind of thing that we're not very good at. America likes to wait till something really bad happens to have a very decisive change in foreign policy. Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and I'm afraid that that's going to be the case now as well. There are policies. So let us now accept as given that Donald Trump, blah, 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 and even more blah, blah, blah. But I believed at the beginning of the Trump administration that after the JCPOA, after the Iran nuclear deal, it would not be possible for Donald Trump to reinstate the sanctions that existed prior to the signature of the deal and to strengthen them. And he did. We forget what the power of the American dollar is. That's what it was, by the way. I mean, you got the Chinese to stop buying, got the Indians to stop buying, got the Russians to stop buying. And the Iranians, we saw it. They were able to give less money to their terrorist proxies. And their population was angry. You need to put your foot, if I can be sort of graphic about it, your jackbooted heel on their throats. You need, there's nothing I haven't written. I've been writing nonstop. Well, I write a lot as it is, but there's nothing I haven't written since October 7th, because it makes me feel like I'm on my own personal jihad and I'm doing something when I can't go and kill the people who I would really like to kill, honestly. It needs to be coupled with a policy that supports regime opponents. The problem is there aren't that many regime opponents. Sure, a lot of average Iranians, woman, life, freedom, all of that, but it is a serious police state. Armed, equipped, technologically supported by and in place by the Germans, the Chinese, and others who have really helped them put that in place. So we need to help. We need to do our best to help them. We need to have much more serious covert plans. The United States hasn't had a serious covert operation on political issues in Iran since Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House in 1994. He appropriated $25 million. The CIA didn't spend it. We need to go to other countries and say, here's the deal. You choose. Qatar, number one. Emiratis also. You know, the Russians, apparently we don't have a policy, but the Chinese, we don't have a policy, but we need to decide. That decision to me is not in the offing. It's really not.
Militarily?
Look, there's always a military option. One of the lessons that I learned, I'm a big supporter of the Iraq War. I remain a big supporter of the Iraq War. My husband wrote the Iraq Liberation Act. But one of the most critical lessons is you got to know what you want afterwards. And you got to have consensus behind it. What are we going to get in Iran? Who's it going to be? We need to know, at least for a bit. Right? You can change, democracy, great, whatever. But we need to recognize that. Part of the big problem about Iran, part of the big problem about all of the analysts is that all of us who are listened to by people like you and people who've influence in other countries are roughly my age, and we haven't really ticked to the fact that the revolution happened in 1979, right? If you were born in 1979, you're 44, almost 45 years old, right? February. This is the population of Iran. The people who remember the Shah and remember what it was like before are a very small and shrinking class, and many of them, most of them, have left. That means you're dealing with a population that you don't know as well, right? We think, oh, let's overthrow the Ayatollahs and the mullahs and the IRGC, and we will get...
Can't be any worse.
See, you know, I'm not sure that's right. And I have this fight with my very dear friends who I agree with most of the time. But at the very least, can't be worse, can't be your foreign policy. You got to have an idea. Because if we ended up with an IRGC military religious dictatorship, I'm not sure that would be better. Those guys are bad, right? Very bad. So I think we need a ratchet, right? We need to go back to the policies we had during the Trump administration, and then we need to tighten them, and then we need to gather a group, because there is a growing consensus, even in Europe, that Iran cannot simply continue on this path. But we need to do something about it. It takes, this is the word I use every day about everything, whether it's anti-Semitism or foreign policy or DEI or traffic in the street. We need leadership. And we have a real bankruptcy of leadership. And that's a big problem. And it's not a left problem or a right problem, it's an us problem. Right? So, sorry. I'll try and be a little more concise, because otherwise I know we have a hard stop at 2.
Danielle, thanks a lot. That was a great overview. There's just one thing that I didn't hear you really delve into, and that's Qatar's role.
I don't understand why Qatar gets a pass.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I think there is a growing consensus in Congress, our Congress, that needs to end. The Qataris they play both sides, but they don't really, you know. They only really play one side. Al Jazeera, right? I went back and looked this up. Al Jazeera, our Defense Department, during the Iraq War, accused them of coordinating with Al-Qaeda to entrap and then film attacks on our soldiers. The Israelis believe that Al Jazeera is helping Hamas track troop movements inside Gaza, okay? Again, all of this is public, it's been in print. Who lives in Qatar, okay? All of the Hamas leadership. Where did the Taliban live before they were re-elevated to power by the Biden administration? Qatar, right? Where's Al-Qaeda? And who does Al-Qaeda work through? The Qataris. ISIS, when ISIS was rampaging through Iraq and Syria, okay, who were the people who talked to them? The Qataris. Okay. When the Qataris were mistakenly, a bunch of them on a hunting trip, were mistakenly kidnapped, were any of them killed? No. They transferred millions of dollars to ISIS. Okay? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. They support, they stand by, they speak for the Iranians. The one thing I'll say is they're completely ecumenical. It doesn't, as long as you're dreadful, they're with you. But, we have one of our most important air bases there, Al Udeid. We fly most of our missions in the Middle East, all of our missions in Afghanistan out of Al Udeid. Our CENTCOM, Central Command, is in charge of the entire area of responsibility of the Med, the Red Sea, all of that area. Right, we've got our 5th Fleet in Bahrain. We've got our Air Force at Al Udeid. Okay, I have with senior military leaders called for us to move it. Okay, but CENTCOM, and I love those guys, and I'm very grateful for their service. They love the Qataris. Those guys are great. They're just like us in another uniform. I work with them great. And that's the thing. They've become political advocates for them. So when you go and you listen particularly to a speech by an ex-general who was a commander of CENTCOM, they will just talk about how wonderful it is to work with the Qataris. The problem is it's wonderful for Hamas as well, right? And we have not forced them to choose. And they will not choose. And what they do when you hit them, I testified against them before the Senate Banking Committee a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something. They wrote to the chairman complaining about my testimony. They démarched a diplomatic communique, right, complaining about my statement. They go after you. They use their lobbyists. They spend money. The correlation, just to give you a nice little taste, the correlation between money from a Middle Eastern country, almost exclusively, Qatar, to an American university relates to a 300% increase in anti-Semitism on campus. No joke. I have the report. So it's garbage, right? But it needs a campaign, it needs determination. And they've got members of Congress who love them.
Is it something that you're working on at the moment?
It's something that I am working on and other people are working on. I don't think it's tenable. The problem is it's an uphill fight. And you know, you're talking about multiple targets here, right? You're talking about Qatar. Oman is in the pocket of the Iranians and fronts for the Houthis. You've got Yemen, you've got Iraq, you've got Syria, Assad, who killed 500,000 people and was then invited to the climate conference. Can you believe that? And only didn't come when he thought that he might be arrested. So, yes, I am and other people are. And you know what the most important thing here is? It's not, we must get Qatar or we must change them. It's just sunshine. Let everybody see what they're doing with their money, because they're spending it here. Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine in our case. It's all their money. Let's just know who's paying you, right? That. Sunshine is a big project that I'm working on right now with my colleagues at AEI. It's a big priority. So much for being succinct.
More, but I will. The gentleman over there with the glass. I don't know.
The 7th of October attack was probably implemented because Israel was asleep in terms of intelligence. What do you think would have happened if Israel wasn't asleep at that time? Would this have occurred at some later time, or?
We're obviously going to learn much more when there's a commission of inquiry. I'll tell you what I think. Everything has been what I think, but I think Israeli intelligence has become hugely complacent in recent years, in large part because Israel's so good at what they do. I think Israel's become very rich, and I think Israel's become very dependent on what we call technical means, right? Signals intelligence, looking underground, heat signatures, satellites, drones, all the other stuff. And what they learned on October 7th is, oh my God, we thought Hamas was a bunch of bumpkins, right, in bad shirts that looked like fouda. And it turns out, no, they're actually probably as good as Hezbollah. They have intelligence. They have cyber capabilities. They know much more about Israeli secrets than the Israelis ever believed that they did. And the Israelis had nobody on that border. Nobody. No human beings. Why? Because you don't need human beings when you've got your eyes in the sky. And I also think that I think the Israelis have created in their minds a hierarchy of the people in the Middle East that they respect. And it's moved very much over towards the Gulf. Respect with dislike the Iranians, and respect with, I'd like to work with you and your sovereign wealth fund, the Gulf. And Egypt and Lebanon, Lebanon doesn't even exist as a country in the Israeli strategic consideration. It's Hezbollah, Iran transshipment, Hezbollah, it's nothing else. Right? Lebanon is a failed state, the Israelis don't care. They don't even care. Syria, right? There's a long, nasty bit of analysis to be done about Israeli complacency about the Russian presence in Syria, right? And Israel's belief, like its belief that it had a special relationship, and this is Bibi very much, a special relationship with China, a special relationship with Putin. Yeah. Turns out they weren't so special after all. I worry that a lot of us have this problem. I can't talk about Australia, I don't know anything about it, but a friend of mine is your DNI, so you must be amazing. I don't feel that way about our own intelligence. I think this is the balance and the problem. It's very difficult, and as technology's gotten so good, so great, and we can barely process the amount of information that we have that way. Right? We can always tell you what happened afterwards, as we go looking for it, but we can't tell you what's going to happen beforehand. And there's no substitute for human beings, and there's no substitute for respecting your enemy. And I suspect in this case the Israelis fell down on both. But we'll obviously know much more than what Danielle Pletka and her watery t-shirt think about that soon.
All right, I think we'll take the last question from Cameron Stewart from the UK.
You talk about how the Americans are subtly increasing the pressure on Israel partly because of domestic opinion, deaths in Gaza, etc. But what does that actually look like? Where does that go? Because you've got Netanyahu, you do have public opinion in Israel, as far as I'm aware, is very, very solid behind destroying Hamas.
Yeah.
So what latitude and what actual influence would the Americans have if they start to ratchet up the pressure? What are the limitations of that?
Well, first of all, we could stop vetoing Security Council resolutions.
That would be a big step, though, wouldn't it?
It would, but I was surprised we did. Right, because what we could have done is said we won't accept this one, we'll negotiate, right, which is what we usually do. We negotiate from something awful to something merely dreadful. And in this case, we vetoed it. And I don't know what the dynamics were behind it. So it might have been a situation where we weren't able to negotiate at all. But we can do that. We can start working with our friends, the Europeans, to be a little bit less friendly, because that's where they are. Anyway, the Germans have been amazing. I don't know whether any of you saw the speech of the Deputy Chancellor, the Greens, Habeck. I mean, one of my surrogate children is German, and I sent it to her, and she said it made her cry. We could, we could have the president step back a little bit and have his spokespeople be a little bit less forthright. And we could do what we're doing already, which is tell the Israelis, hurry up, less from the air. Okay, we don't want to see, that's, less from the air, less air cover, more pauses, more shipments, more avenues to leave. There's a lot we could do. We have been, and I say we, I don't usually say we in this case, but the Biden administration has really been very publicly good. It can stop. There are also Democratic voices in Congress who are very anti-Israel. I would go further and say, but you can guess. You can give them a little bit more. I mean, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. It's already begun quietly. The Israelis have basically said we're doing our best. We're going to do our best. We're going to try harder. They haven't said drop dead. There will come a point where they will either have to, and then they will. And, you know, the chips will fall where they may. I think justice is on their side, but, you know, none of us have seen a lot of Gaza. Once we do, they're going to lose a lot of sympathy. What happened on October 7th was terrible. I know they have to, I know that Hamas wants them to kill these people. I know it's on Hamas. I know there was a ceasefire on October 6th. I know all of that. The court of public opinion doesn't look like that. And it's already very bad in the American press. Very, very, very bad, like the Australian press, except for you guys. Right. It can get worse. And you can use the International Criminal Court. International Criminal Court has already, come on, I really want to do this. He's already been, the head of it's already been to Israel. So, you know, there's a lot that could happen. A lot that could happen. And I know the Israelis feel the pressure. Right now they feel it quietly. And they're going to, at a certain point, they're going to have to stop. They're not going to be able to kill 40,000 Hamas soldiers. And so they have to make that decision. And this is why it's so critical that rather than talking constantly to their foreign interlocutors about how many people you're killing and what ammunition you're using and how many tunnels you opened up and what you dug up, and no, remember October 7th, look at these people, look at the women, look at the rape, look at the this, look at the UN, look at the outrage. They're going to have to say, here is our vision. Here is what we will accept, because that will change the subject for them and give people something to work towards. They haven't done that. I think they're doing it privately now. They say they are, but they haven't done that in any very serious way yet, to my mind. And yes, we know what happened, but that doesn't mean that war isn't hell for everybody, she said, coining a phrase. Hey, thank you all very much. It's such a pleasure. Thank you to AIJAC for having me. Thank you to my mum for being here. And if you missed anything, it's easy to find me, dpletka at aei.org, just like AIJAC, not com, org. And I'm always happy to share my work and that of my colleagues. And most importantly, my God, we have a podcast called What the Hell is Going On? And everybody must sign up for it, because my listenership, it's second after America is Australia, but you could make it better. Thank you.